Hi, my name is Danny Andrussier, and I'm standing outside of the Appomattox Courthouse in Appomattox, Virginia. This was the historic site of the surrendering of General Robert E. Lee's army to General Grant, which signified the ending of the American Civil War. So how did this place come to be? Well, in the early 1800s, this village was established, but of course it wasn't called Appomattox Courthouse at that time until Appomattox Courthouse was actually built in 1846. So, this village was simply a passageway between Richmond and Lynchburg. When the Civil War began in 1861, Appomattox Courthouse was not of much significance. After a disaster at the battle at Sailor's Creek on April 6, 1865, where the Confederates lost thousands of men, including 6,000 men taken prisoner. General Lee was on the run from General Grant's army. General Lee believed that if he could go westward, then he could escape to the south and avoid Grant's army. However, Lee did not know that a federal army had been moving up from the south on the shorter roads alongside the Appomattox River to cut him off. Lee's army was in desperate need of rations because they were low on food and supplies. So, they thought that if they could just reach the Appomattox station along the railroad tracks, then they could receive these rations and be able to sustain themselves. Unfortunately for Lee's army, they were cut off about a mile before they could reach Appomattox Courthouse. Lee was surrounded from the north, east, south, and west. These are the final headquarters of General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. These woods are located less than a mile to the northeast of Appomattox Courthouse. The headquarters were established on April 8, 1865. It was here that General Lee called his final council of war, where he planned the April 9th attack on Appomattox Station. At dawn on April 9, 1865, Lee decided to give the order to attack the Union troops that were stationed at Appomattox Station. Unfortunately for his troops again, Lee's army was unsuccessful, and at 8:30 a.m., Lee received word that his army was stuck and could not continue. So at 9:30 a.m., General Lee sent a letter back. Lee said that the only thing he could do was meet with General Grant, and he would rather die 1,000 deaths. With just 30,000 troops compared to the Union's 65,000 troops, General Lee's Northern Virginian army had no choice but to surrender. This is the McLean House. In this house, General Lee and General Grant met to agree on terms of a surrender. Both generals met in this house in the parlor room. Now we're going to go inside. Later that day in the afternoon, General Lee met with General Grant in this very room. In just an hour and a half, terms of surrender were agreed upon. Although it would have appeared that General Lee's request to meet with General Grant was to formally surrender his army, this was not so. In fact, Lee had specific orders from the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, to not surrender and to instead use guerrilla warfare against the Union Army. Lee did not believe in guerrilla warfare and knew that his men would suffer significant losses by continuing to fight. By surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse, he defied Davis's orders. Grant's terms of surrender were generous considering the hostility between the forces and both generals. Abraham Lincoln had instructed General Grant to have mercy on the Confederate Army. This is because Abraham Lincoln was attempting to reconstruct the Union. Confederate soldiers were allowed to return to their homes to begin new lives. Because of Grant's generous terms, Lee accepted and surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia. As part of the terms of surrender, Lee's army had to surrender all of its artillery, including 61 cannons. This is the Stagecoach Road. After the surrender, the Confederate troops laid down their arms on this road. This is the Clover Hill Tavern. This is actually the first building that was created in the village that would become known as Appomattox Courthouse.
As part of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, nearly 30,000 parole passes were printed for the 30,000 Confederate soldiers of the Army of Northern Virginia who were led by General Lee. The passes were slips of paper that allowed the soldiers to return to their homes as paroled prisoners of war. The passes were printed in this room of the tavern beginning on April 10th, 1865, just one day after the surrender of Lee's army. The soldiers with these passes were also given rations from the Union Army by the request of Ulysses Grant.